Hi and welcome back to the Crafty Whisk. It's Ollie here today with another cooking video for you. I am decorating a chocolate mud cake in the style of Abstract Lady. This is a cake style I've admired for a little while and have been dying to try it out. So I've baked my chocolate mud cakes. I will link to the recipe. And I've already baked my chocolate mud cakes and they've been in the fridge. So now I need to tort the cakes and put a crumb coat on them. So I'm going to be using my wire cutter because chocolate mud cake that I make is perfectly cut with the wire cutter rather than a fancy cutting utensil. And you can pick these wire cutters up at cake decorating shops everywhere, and they're really cheap and they're very effective. So I'm just unwrapping, and I've already pre-measured my cakes. They're both 3 inches high. So I'm just going to do 4 layers at 1.5 inches. See how it just glides through? That's the beauty of my chocolate mud cake recipe. It's not dense like your traditional mud cake. It's very easy to work with normally. The gluten-free one is a little trickier because it's a little bit more fragile. And because they're pretty much exactly 3 inches, there's nothing really to come off of that bit. So there was no scraps for my husband to eat with this cake, much to his annoyance. And it has been a red hot minute since I've made a cake too, since I closed my business. So you'll see me fiddling a lot more than what I used to. But that's okay. Now you can sugar syrup your cake layers if you like. I don't have any need for my cakes because they're always nice and moist as it is. They don't require sugar syruping. And I find that the buttercream sort of slips and slides a little bit, so I've never really bothered with it at all. But it is a way of adding more flavour in because you can flavour your sugar syrup. And I'm just putting them onto baking paper because it's just easier for me to clean the mess up later rather than having to re-sanitize every single time the cake goes onto the bench. I just sanitize everything on the bench and the bench itself before I start, and then I try and keep the cakes out of contact with anything else. So there's the 2 cakes cut, ready to go. And this is a cake board that I use. I just call it my setup board. It's just a piece of very thick plastic of some description. I'm not exactly sure, but it's what I use to set all my cakes on. And I'm just going to sticky tape the bottom cake board to my setup board. I found this the easiest for me. Other people use a bit of icing or ganache. I just found a little bit of sticky tape works just as well. And these cakes are 7-inch round cakes. And it's going to be about a 6-inch high cake by the end of it. So I'm just popping a little bit of buttercream, and I will put a link up to my buttercream recipe as well. And I'm putting a little bit of buttercream on the bottom to secure the bottom layer. And it's actually the top portion of a cake that I'm using as this bottom layer. And then just grabbing some more really yummy Swiss meringue buttercream to put in between the layers. You can use a piping bag here if you prefer. I kind of know how much I need to spatula on each time. I should say I used to know. I do fiddle a bit around with it here. It's been a few years. And then this is the bottom of the cake, and I actually flip it upside down so the bottom of the cake is face up. Now I'll put some more buttercream here, and then I'm going to show you what I do for tall cakes. I consider a 6-inch tall cake a tall cake, taller than standard. So especially with gluten-free, I need to be able to support the 2 extra cake layers on top. And I do that with straws, which I know a lot of people just use wooden dowels now. I've always had a lot of success with these bubble tea straws, I think they are. So I'm just putting 3 in because it is only a 7-inch cake. And I'm just putting them in sort of in a triangle shape. I know the camera angle isn't really great. I've got to sort of work out a different camera angle for my cooking ones. And then with my finger, I just mark where the top of the buttercream is and then cut it there and then slide the straw back in. And now I'm going to be using a 6-inch cake board. So it's an inch smaller than the cake. And I'm putting that on top of the straws. And the straws act as a support system for the top portion of the cake. So again, I'm putting some buttercream down on the cake board to secure the cake onto the cake board. And I'm using the top of the cake as the base layer. And because it's a tall cake, I'm just making sure that I'm getting it on reasonably straight, though it's not crooked. And I just use a cake scraper. This one just happens to be a clear acrylic one. I have metal ones as well, as you'll see a little bit further on. I like using the acrylic ones for the crumb coat. So again, with the icing, buttercream. Now you can ganache as well. If you're using fondant for covering your cake, I still do buttercream in the layers and then I do a ganache on the outside of the cake. But this cake is going to be all buttercream. And I go down to eye level just to make sure that it is level. And then once again, I use the bottom of the cake and flip it upside down. So the bottom of the cake is actually the top. And I'm just going around with the acrylic cake scraper and I've butted it against that bottom cake board just to see if my cake is touching the scraper. If it is, I need to trim it down because you want a layer of buttercream around the cake. And that bottom cake board is the distance or the gap the buttercream is going to create. So this is all the scraps I had. It wasn't much at all. And I'm just checking again, making sure I'm going to have a nice even layer of buttercream around there, and I am. So now is the crumb coat. This is what is going to seal all those crumbs in so that you don't get crumbs on the outside decorated cake. With the gluten-free recipe that I'm using, which is my chocolate mud recipe, all I've done is substituted the all-purpose flour for gluten-free all-purpose flour. That was Miss Amy in the background there, the other half of the crafty whisk. So yes, with the gluten-free one, it was more crumbly than my normal mud cake, so the crumb coat was especially important. So it's just a matter of putting down your buttercream of choice. I'm using Swiss meringue, and applying a nice even layer to lock those crumbs in. And I'm actually using a little bit of pressure to put the buttercream on. Not a lot of pressure because I don't want the cake to move, but I am trying to get into the little nooks and crannies with the buttercream. And the beauty with Swiss meringue buttercream is it doesn't crust, which is what I love about it, because it enables you to have more time to do this kind of thing. The American buttercream, or the normal buttercream everyone's used to, which is just basically butter and sugar, it sets with a crust on it, and it can be a little bit more difficult to do this if you need to take your time because it will start to crust. Now this took me forever. It never used to. I am so out of practice with this. And I am using an offset spatula. I find them a lot more easy to use than the straight spatulas. And I'm just finishing it up now, making sure the top is smooth and as level as can be. And then I'm just using the clear acrylic scraper and I'm holding it at a 90-degree angle to the cake so that it ensures that my sides are straight. And I'm just patching up a few little areas where I think crumbs are going to poke out. Because you want your base to be a solid foundation for your decorating on top of it. If you don't start off with a good foundation, your cake could very well collapse. So then I've popped it in the fridge for about half an hour. So the buttercream is now firm to the touch. And I'm going to colour part of my icing in avocado, which is from Americolor. And I've done one darker and one lighter because I'm actually going to do an ombre effect on this cake as well. So now that the cake is out of the fridge and the icing is nice and firm, I'm putting on my mid coat. Normally it would be my top coat, but because I'm going for an ombre look, I need the buttercream to be beautiful so I can add the ombre effect on afterwards. So I'm just going around making sure that I have a nice layer of buttercream. And the buttercream that I used was one batch of my Swiss meringue buttercream, and I only had a couple of tablespoons left over. So one batch will do a tall 7-inch round cake. And it also will do a standard 8-inch, 4-inch high cake. So 8-inch round, 4 inches high. And if you prefer, you can pipe the buttercream on. So then all you're doing is smoothing out the piping. I don't like doing that because I find it's a waste of piping bags. This doesn't take all that much longer, especially if you've had practice, unlike me lately. Now I use my metal scraper, and it is at a 90-degree angle to the cake to ensure that you have a beautiful straight up and down cake, that it's not tilting off to the side or anything like that. If you have your scraper at an angle, which I will be doing later on, you run the risk of not having a completely vertical cake. It could go wonky. But there is some techniques that you need to have your scraper at an angle. But doing this, it has to be at a 90-degree angle. And I've buttered it right up against that base cake board so that it has somewhere to actually latch onto. I'm not just doing it willy-nilly against the cake. I'm actually butting the base of the cake scraper to the base round cake board that's underneath the 7-inch cake layers. And you'll notice because I used a 6-inch cake board in the middle of the cake that you don't see that there's a division of cakes there at all. That's because I went down an inch for that centre cake board. That's really important. And if this was going to be a tiered cake, so you're going to have another whole cake on top of this cake, like you see with wedding cakes and so forth, you would then also need to put straws in your top layer of cake as well, so that when you put the next cake on top, it has a solid surface, or not a solid surface, it has a structural base to hold it there and not to sink into that bottom cake. It's absolutely essential in tiered cakes. And also a centre dowel is as well, but I'll show you that in a later video. This cake didn't require a central dowel, which is basically a piece of timber, I can't think of the word, that goes right through the centre of the cake and attaches to the base cake board. Okay, so now I'm going to start the ombre effect because I'm happy with my covering of buttercream there. So I'm just using my spatula to put on the darker avocado green at the base. Again, you can use a piping bag here if you think that will be easier, and it probably would be easier, but I didn't want a perfect line between my greens and the white. I was going for an ombre rustic kind of effect, so I didn't feel the need to use a piping bag. So I'm just going all the way around once, and then I do want it to come up a little bit higher, so I will continue to put some more of the darker green on. And I'm just sort of like smoothing it out so that I can see exactly what's happening. And I'm not concerned about the top of the cake at the moment because that is going to have another covering of buttercream on it as well. So now that that's pretty smooth, I'm just going to clean up the buttercream that's on the base setup board and go to the lighter colour green. And do exactly the same thing. And if you're not confident here, definitely use a piping bag. Unless you want the rustic look. But remember, we are always our own worst critics. The person that's going to be receiving the cake will absolutely love it, and they'll love that you've put all this time and effort into making it. And if they don't, well, they don't get cake next year, do they? And again, just smoothing it a little bit so I know roughly where I am with how thick the icing is. And then once I'm happy with this, I then go and finish it off with putting more of the white icing, the white buttercream, up from the pale green right up to the top of the cake. So I'm skipping over this bit for you because it's basically the same as what I did with the greens. I'll just start it off, and then with the magic of television, you'll see that the white is completely on. There we go. So now I go back in with my metal scraper, and this time I am holding it at a very close angle to the cake because I don't want a lot of icing to come off, and I don't want to touch that base board because now the icing has come around, it's come out of that a little bit. So this is where it does get a little bit fiddly. I didn't want it quite this rustic, so I am just filling up a few of the little holes. Swiss meringue buttercream does tend to be a little bit holy, and you can smooth it perfectly with a very warm cake scraper. You just pop it into a jug of boiling water or boiled water, which is still close to boiling hot. You wipe it clean, wipe the water off of it, and then you go around the cake with your warm scraper and it smooths out the buttercream absolutely beautifully. I didn't need to do that with this cake because I wasn't going for the super, super clean look. So see how it's ombreed a little bit? It is a bit tricky because it is late at night now when I'm filming this as well. But it has got the nice green ombre look happening. So now I just need to fix the top up. And again, I'm not too concerned with the top as long as it's level. That's okay because it is going to be covered with flowers. And again, get down at eye level with the top of the cake to make sure that your icing is all level. And then just a final scrape down the sides. And be careful when you do that you don't put the green icing back into the white icing bowl. So I'm just still fiddling. And then I'm going to put it back into the fridge to set, and I'm going to start working on the flowers. Now I have washed and dried the flowers so that they are nice and food safe. But we do need to attach them to toothpicks and skewers because we cannot put wire directly into a cake. It is not food safe at all. And I don't know where these flowers were made, so I don't want to be sticking basically foreign objects into the cake. Whereas cake skewers or just skewers that you have in your kitchen and toothpicks, they are totally fine. They are cake safe. So the flowers, let me pull the heads off. I've done that. And then the other ones, I just need to trim down the wire a little bit. So these gerbils were really good actually because the skewer fit exactly into the hole left by the wire. So that was brilliant. The other ones I did have to use a bit of floristry tape, it's called floristry tape, but you purchase it at the cake shops. And you use that to secure the toothpick to the wire of the flower. But we still don't want the tape to go into the cake. Only the toothpick goes into the cake. So that's the floristry tape. You need to stretch it to activate the glue. And then you just start winding it onto either the toothpick or the flower. Make sure it's adhered. And then you bring in the toothpick and I've got the toothpick sitting about 1 centimetre onto the flower. And you just wrap it around a little bit of the toothpick to make sure it's secure. And then you just rip the bit off if you've got anything left. And I apologise for the noise you can hear. It is Orion and he's hungry. So the cake has been sitting in the fridge for about an hour. And I'm going to put the Abstract Lady cake fropper on. I will show you in a different video how I made this. You can buy them already made, but I found it quite easy to make. It wasn't difficult at all. So now it's just a matter of arranging the flowers to make it look like she has hair of flowers, basically. So I'm trimming down the long skewers. I don't need them that long. And you also don't have to push them right into the cake. The hydrangea I didn't push all the way into the cake because I wanted a bit of height. And I wanted the gerbils to be able to sit there nice and proud as well. And now you will see my family walking around behind me because it is night time and they've had dinner, but they've all got the snack hungries again. So they disappear into the other kitchen to go and get their snacks. And you can be strategic where you place your flowers too. If you don't think that the cake fropper is sitting exactly right, you can use the flower to go in between the wire bits, and it helps secure the fropper and stay in place. I have got toothpicks on the cake fropper to secure it, but I've only got 2 in there because I didn't want them to be obvious. And it's just a matter of making all the flowers do what you want them to do. I really wanted a nice long stretch of sweet pea, but it actually isn't wired, so it wasn't staying how I wanted it to stay. So I only took a small piece of the sweet pea and then I made it stay in place using other flowers to secure it, if that makes sense. Because the other flowers were all wired, so I could actually arrange them so they were pushing the sweet pea towards the cake a little bit. And I actually like using the silk flowers as opposed to real flowers because they don't wilt for a start. You can pop them in the fridge, nothing happens to them there. You can clean them easily. And I'm just sort of worried that we're using fresh flowers, they can wilt on you very quickly because you're only using the flower head. And now my husband has come to offer his helpful criticism, shall we say, into where to place flowers. He can't help himself sometimes. But you can see how it's coming along. It was a really nice cake to make. It was probably the longest A thing that took me was actually putting all the flours onto toothpicks and skewers. That did take a couple of hours. And with the Swiss meringue buttercream, I always advise my customers to store the cake in the fridge, but to take it out 2 hours before they want to eat it, so the Swiss meringue buttercream comes to room temperature, because when it's cold, you can really taste the butter in it. So as it comes to room temperature, you get the more silky feel in your mouth as opposed to crunchy icing. Well, not crunchy, but solid icing, I should say. It makes the cake more enjoyable to eat. I'm just using the leaves. I haven't wired them or put them on toothpicks because I'm not actually putting them into the cake. They're just sort of sitting in between the flowers to give a little bit of greenery, to tie the green ombre cake into the flowers. This is the part of cake making I actually really enjoy, the decorating part. It's also the part that takes the longest, or it can take the longest. Oh, and I forgot to mention too that when I took the cake out of the fridge before I added the flowers, I took it off of its preparation plate board and I popped it onto its normal cake board and I secured that with a bit of ganache. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know if you want more of this sort of thing. And please subscribe and like. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.